So now we've looked at all the built-in or default modulation options that are on the front of the Mother 32. Let's look at some of the things that we can do with the LFO using the patch bay. Now, the first of these is one of my favorites. Because this is a modular synth, I can actually route the output of the LFO into the output of the Moog overall, so we can look at the LFO and see what it's doing on the oscilloscope. Now, to do that, I'm going to grab a patch cable. I'm going to connect one end of it to the LFO triangle output. That's getting me the triangle wave from the LFO. I'm going to put the other end into the external audio input. And if I make sure that this mix control is all the way to the right, now when I play a note, I'm actually just going to hear the output of the LFO. And that's going to start at a very, very low frequency, so we're not going to be able to hear it. But as I sweep the LFO rate up, it'll come up into the audible frequencies. And you can see on the oscilloscope, we've got that nice triangle wave. If we swap that for the square wave, you can see the LFO coming through as a square wave instead. You can do this if you want to have an arbitrary kind of additional oscillator. It won't go super high in frequency, but it can still be really creatively useful. So next up, kind of similarly to the oscillator section, we have a toggle switch here that lets us change between the square and the saw. However, as you just saw, we have separate outputs down here for the LFO triangle and the LFO square, so we can actually use them both at the same time and route them to different things. So I'm going to take this first patch cable I had here, which is connected to the LFO square. I'm going to move that to the VCF cutoff. So now the LFO is modulating the VCF cutoff or the filter cutoff with a square wave. I'm going to grab a second patch cable, connect that to the LFO triangle. I'm going to connect that into the VCO mod input. Now, the VCO mod input can be selected with this switch on the left of the VCO mod amount control. On the bottom, as you remember, it's LFO. On the top, by default, it's the envelope. But if you have something plugged in here, it'll connect to whatever is plugged in here. In this case, just the triangle wave of the LFO. Now, as I bring up the mod amount, you will hear the pulse width being modified, and you'll also hear the filter being modified by the square wave. That is one of my favorite sounds. I use that all the time. Now, there's one additional thing that I like to do with this, a small change with the patch bay. So we're going to grab another patch cable, and we're going to use this patch cable to change the speed of the LFO so that it goes faster when you go higher on the keyboard and slower when you go lower on the keyboard. The way we do that is plug this in one end to the keyboard output down here, which basically sends a higher voltage when we're higher on the keyboard and a lower voltage when we're lower on the keyboard, and the other end into the LFO rate control here. And now, you can hear we've got that really naturalistic kind of shifting between high speed and low speed, depending on where we're playing on the keyboard. One of my favorite effects. So that's it for the LFO section. In the next video, we'll be taking a look at the VCA, or the voltage controlled amplifier.